Good evening, everyone. Time for episode 36 of The Last Admiral. It is the 22nd of March, 2022, so it should be a lucky episode. I want to talk for a minute about the dedication of The Last Admiral. The book was dedicated to my late friend Joseph Garside. Picture of Joe with his beloved dog. And Joe was a brilliant engineer, much smarter than I am. He worked for Intel, traveled the world working as a mechanical engineer. We played D&D together for years and years. He was a miraculous dungeon master, amazing. And I lost many a great character in his campaigns. Joe was a phenomenal dungeon master, tremendous guy, person. Unfortunately, he had a tragic end. He was robbed in China, received a knee injury during the robbery, and as a complications of surgery, he passed away. So he died far too young. But anyway, the book is dedicated to Joe. His character, Tarek Longstride, is in 3 out of 4 of my books, and he appears in this book, The Last Admiral, as himself, as Joseph Garside. So, anyway, this book is dedicated to Joe. So, the next chapter, where we left off, was entitled Akronsis the Black of Shadow, where we leave Fu and the Islanders battling for their lives in the mansion, in Akron's mansion. And we go to this dragon and see what happens. Lo, his breath was fire, caustic resins, and noxious gas, burning, melting, and choking to all those that touched it. But the Bay Sioux was spawned in the deepest depths of the sea, near the mouth of volcanic fires, and even the dragon's fire could be resisted by them. Yet Akronsis spewed forth a unique mixture of foul chemistries, and those creatures caught in the heart of his exhalations died in agony. He flew 4 sorties over the swarm, and each time his explosive breath killed dozens. But the Bay Sioux were now too close to the building's walls, and his fire could burn it down, and so he landed, and his great body crushed 80 of the devils as he came down. His tremendous spiked tail swept 100 aside, while his wings brought forth a gale that cleared the area to his front. His head and neck he held high, coiled like a snake, and each time that he struck, he caught up and crushed another devilfish. At the base of his Herculean, mastodon-sized head sat a bedraggled-looking, silver-haired elf with red eyes, tattered scraps of adamant mail, and a wide silver belt that held his weapons. Akronsis spoke then in the strange tongue of his homeland, and soon shadowy, alien, insubstantial things appeared out of the mists, and these then did struggle against the Bay Sioux. "Friends of yours?" Wraith asked. "Friends of ours, as long as I remain," Akronsis replied. And I just want to talk about, it's hard for me to read my own work, because when I read it, all my emotional state when I wrote it comes flooding back to me. And if I get to a really emotion-filled portion of the book, I start choking up, or I feel sadness or elation or whatever I was thinking of at the time that I wrote the scene. And every time I read it again to myself, the emotions come back, and I can't help it. So anyway, I try to do my best to be an impartial reader, but it's pretty much impossible. So anyway, let's carry on. Okay. Then we go back to Booblix. Booblix had lived for centuries, the survivor of countless battles of the deep versus whales, giant squid, mermen, and other powerful things that dwelled there, and he had done so with might and with cunning. This new foe was unexpected, but the Defiler had always been their nemesis, a dark adversary that refused alliance and wanted only their ruin. Booblix knew that there was no turning back now, no retreat into the abyss, and then onward to his king, Nundablecht, in failure and defeat. They would slay the seed of the Defiler or die. The serpent was no different than any other gargantuan enemy, and the caretakers knew well how to defeat such opponents. It was then that Booblix emitted foul ochre-colored gases from orifices in his hind limbs, a chemical that drifted out and caused a terrifying reaction among the school. Swarm, swarm, the odor bid to them. Cover its body, tear its flesh, bring it down and devour it. Swiftly then they attacked, so suddenly that Akronsis and his companion could not again take flight or retreat to higher ground, for the horde seized his legs, crawled upon his tail, and overbore him. With their talons they tore at his scales and found his vulnerable flesh beneath them, and with their mandibles they bit and clamped down, seeking to inject their venom. Akronsis roared in anger and agony. Defiantly raising one limb, he snapped and tore, ripping one devilfish free and then another. But for each one that he killed, two more latched onto him, and only his wings and his neck remained free. It was then that Wraith stood upon the skull of his noble steed, drew his blades, and saluted his caretaker adversary. With nimble, godlike agility, he hopped and slid down the neck of his friend, striking and hewing at any Besu that dared to come within reach. Sliding down his gargantuan shoulder, he decapitated two tenacious enemies and cut loose three more before his feet hit the soil. A churning maelstrom of boiling, frenzied arachnids covered every inch of the field around them. Cutting, spinning, dodging, and rolling, Wraith brought battle. Blade Master, Guild Master, Old Master, he was all of these. Giving no quarter, he asked for none. Booblix leered at him hungrily, anxious beyond measure to see his end. "Victoria!" he screeched. "You have all proved the hardest to kill, but die here you will." Click-clack, Booblix cast his spell, and Wraith felt dark forces wash over him, filling him with paralyzing dread. But he had not survived for so long by being susceptible to sorcery, and with his will he cast off Booblix's spell like throwing off a heavy coat, and fought on. "Impossible!" Booblix roared. "No mortal can resist me." Whirling his arms in counter circles, Booblix raised yet another deadly power, and in each of his segmented cephalopod arms he summoned hellish energies and hurled burning orbs of fire at his dark Elfar enemy. Flames exploded across his body, burning off his remaining beard and singeing his flesh. But this, too, Wraith resisted. "Very well, fallen master of a forgotten family," Booblix said tauntingly. "I shall destroy you myself." Adeline, looking through a crack between the doors, saw the dragon, who was for some unknown reason trying to help them. Burning gases and blistering mist seeped through the openings in the doors and windows, settling ominously near the floor and drifting down into the lower places. Avoiding the gases, she wrapped a strip of cloth bandage around her nose and mouth, and it helped a little. A sudden flash of light revealed a tiny man standing atop of the dragon's head, and then sliding down its neck and out of view. "Wraith!" she cried out, ecstatic and horrified beyond measure. "Fu," she said urgently. "It's Wraith, out there with the dragon. Oh no! The serpent is falling. He's collapsing beneath the swarm." "Come," Umlanu urged once again himself. "The dragon is the child of Nui Lua and guardian of the people. We must all fight now, or we die." Though they were exhausted and without hope, their fear turned to resolve once more. "Lead us out," Adeline said. Umlanu led them then, his 2 sons with him, and his family's warriors behind him. Emboldened and no longer so afraid, they struck out again from the mansion's front doors as one unified group. In numbers only 30, and their enemies still hundreds strong. Mighty Fu, his brothers Hien and Atu, Mora, Adeline, and Lily were among them. Past the hedgerow they fought, charging over countless bodies of friend and foe, burning pools of noxious resins, and onto the open pasture lands where now the heat of battle raged. Akronsis brawled on, but he was weakening, for now no part of his body was free of the assailing host, save for half of one wing and his head. Turning backward, he unleashed his flaming breath upon himself, dissolving countless numbers of Besu beneath its volatile inferno. Many more injured and dying stubbornly clung to his hide, due to the resistant nature of their own devilish chemistry. Minions of Shadow fought to save him, but their powers were limited, and their numbers were too few to liberate him. Akronsis roared, trying to slip back through the gate of shadow and save himself, but his pain and weakness were too profound, and he could no longer summon his power. Death, he knew, was very near. Umlanu led them against the swarm that assailed Akronsis. Occupied as the Besu were, they were unprepared to meet the new threat, and the islanders killed 70 in the first rush and nearly reached the dragon's body. Hien and Fu worked valiantly to control their flanks and keep their group unified in the fight, but the caretakers were quick to adjust themselves, and they soon had both the islanders and Akronsis surrounded. Wraith, covered in scaly gore and the caretaker's foul blood, cut through them like a whirlwind until he reached Bublix. Towering over 20 feet in height, the monster dwarfed him. His body flashed brilliantly red around his black bands of scales, and his fins fanned out widely, exposing their poisonous spines. His mandibles clicked in eagerness, while his eye stalks followed Wraith's every move. Wraith faked his movement to the left and then rushed back in, just as Bublix belched forth a black stench that filled the air around him, obscuring his body and putrefying the ether. Holding his breath, Wraith attacked. Striking the fleshy legs of his adversary, he tried to rush on past, but the mud was deep there, and his feet were soon trapped in the mire. The footnote says the dragons of Tempest are immune to their own exhalations. That's why the dragon did not kill himself when he breathed on himself. Okay. Bublix caught him then, grasping his body and lifting him up in his crushing pincers. Hoisting him up to gloat, he accepted the cut from Wraith's free hand without complaint and squeezed. The hug blasted the air out of Wraith's lungs, and he lost his weapons. "Not yet, Vittoria," Bublix said triumphantly. "Witness the destruction of your home and your school before you die. There, that golden-haired one. I can sense your love for her. She will die first." Clicking his horrific incantations, he summoned another globe of abysmal fire. Reaching backward to hurl his deadly magic, Wraith screamed out in bitter agony. It was then that the storm clouds grew thicker still. Lightning flashed, and the earth shook beneath their feet. A thunderbolt then struck Bublix, stunning him and causing his arms to spasm. An instant of release was all that Wraith needed to fall free, dropping 15 feet to the ground. The deep mud saved him from serious injury, and he crawled and climbed away from Booblix as fast as he could. Bolt after bolt pounded the field, blasting great holes in the ranks of the Bay Sioux. "No!" Booblix cried. "That's impossible!" Turning just in time, he faced his mortal enemies. Standing before him from the east and out of the sea walked 80 giants, with emerald skin and hair of red and some of gold or black. Armor of seashells and walrus hide protected their bodies, and in their hands were huge tridents and gigantic spears. Shaka, son of Senzan Kakona, was their chief. It was he who faced Booblix. In height and size, the two enemies were similar, although Booblix was likely the heavier of the two. Circling each other they sparred, talon against trident, and black magic versus sorcery. Hunghak led the Eastern School against their new foes, as the dragon was then defeated, and so another dire struggle began. Wraith, forgotten by all in the clouds of poison mist, found his rapier and snuck in. Broken ribs or no, his Adeline was somewhere on the field, and Booblix had to die. And of course Shaka, Senzakakona, also known as Shaka Zulu, was a powerful chieftain of the Zulu tribe, used here as the king of the giant mariners of Poseidon. That's where I got Shaka. And a trident is a 3-pronged spear, of course. Okay. Wraith sprinted as best as he could through the muck and the mire, hewing at Booblix's right leg and then at his left, cutting deeply as he did so. Booblix screamed in pain and swatted at him, but Shaka, a bold warrior, seized this new advantage and plunged his trident to its limit into Booblix's body. The mighty caretaker clicked in agony and slashed at Shaka's body with his talons, but Shaka withstood the blows and tore his weapon free with great violence. Booblix's head rolled back with open mandibles in preparation for a deadly lunge, but his life then left him, and he fell. Seeking Adeline, Wraith fought his way through the host with determination. His ribs hurt with every breath, but it was a familiar pain, and he adjusted his moves to compensate for it. Looking toward Akronsis, his superior night vision revealed the long-haired fighter, an adamant whale, working hard to free the dragon from the Bay Sioux that still clung to him. Another nearby fighter was also clearly a woman, albeit a little shorter and more slight of form. That must be Lily, he thought. Working his way toward their battle line, an islander lad nearly skewered him with his spear as mud and gore covered him, making him unrecognizable. Parrying the boy's uncertain thrust, the lad finally realized that he was no enemy. Adeline saw his approach as she was pulling her sword free of her dead adversary. Her glance was simultaneously a mixture of horror, anger, amazement, and adoration. "Good to see you too, dear," Wraith said. "I've got a bone to pick with you later," Adeline replied with an exasperated look. "Yes," Wraith acquiesced, suddenly engaged by a new enemy. "Later might be better, darling." Side by side in the fight, even Lily seemed to know more about the art of war than she had ever let on. Akronsis trembled in pain. Wounded terribly, he bled from every quarter. But as the swarm swept away from him to face the giants, the spirit of battle rekindled in him, and he began rolling to the left, right, and shaking violently like a dog, scratching its back on rough ground. Bay Sioux around and too near to him were crushed beneath his tremendous bulk, and those that clung to him were flung far off. Umlanu and his fighters barely had time to avoid his desperate struggle, but somehow, they all escaped it. Rising tremblingly to his feet, Akronsis invoked his magic, and more minions of shadow appeared. "Destroy the caretakers," he commanded. "Tear them limb from limb." Enraged, the dragon lashed out at any caretaker within reach, crushing them between his jaws or beneath his feet. His torn wing draped down pitifully, shredded and bleeding from its skeletal frame. His right hind leg dragged along sadly behind him, ravaged as it was beyond recognition. Still, Akronsis was a deadly foe, even so near his own end, and Hunghak again rallied the swarm against him. Releasing his abhorrent chemical secretions, the Besu nearest to him renewed their frenzy and turned back toward Akronsis. The dragon reared up, preparing again the last of his devastating breath, but it was then that Fu and the islanders made a stand before him. Embracing his rage, Fu tested the limits of his mystical strength. Caretakers swarmed toward him, ravenously seeking his flesh, but his spear was like a thing possessed, tearing through everything that came against it. Umlenu and the people prevented any enemy from striking him from the rear, and the bodies of the Besu piled up in a wide swath before them. Hunghak was huge among the Besu, not as great in stature as Bublix or Sehoy was, but nearly so, and he commanded the Eastern school well. Strength of giants this one has, Hunghak observed. Crush him, kill him. His school divided, streaking forces of heaven, summoned by the giant mariners, made the earth boil and explode around him as he slithered toward Fu. Cold lightning blasted his fellows on his right and to his left. A near miss singed his flesh but did not kill him. Accustomed as he was to preying upon other lethal inhabitants of the deep that generated electricity. His body flashed in crimson color of his rage. His pincers opened hungrily in anticipation of the kill. Fu stood his ground, calf deep in the poisoned mud of the field. He whipped his spear's shaft so that slime and gore upon it flew from its surface. Devilfish lay ruined all around him, leaking their wretched fumes, and still the horde came against him, unrelenting. I think that's where we'll end up here, otherwise we'll have too long of an episode for YouTube. So tune in next time. Next episode, we'll find out if Fu, Wraith, and his friends survive the attack of the Besu at the mansion. Thank you and have a great night.